For decades, we've been taught to fear vitamin D. You've heard it before. Be careful. Too much vitamin D is dangerous. It can raise calcium. It can damage your kidneys. It can become toxic. And yes, in extremely rare cases, with extremely high amounts taken improperly and without cofactors, that can happen. But here's the real question almost no one asks. Is it safe to stay deficient? Because that's the part no one talks about. Humans did not evolve hiding from the sun. We evolved under it. For thousands of years, people worked outdoors, farming, hunting, building, exposed to intense, unfiltered sunlight daily. There was no sunscreen, no office cubicles, no blue light screens, no fear of stepping outside at noon. Now suddenly the sun is dangerous, vitamin D is risky, and we're told to take safe amounts. But what exactly is a safe amount? The conventional recommendation 600 to 800 IUs per day is based almost entirely on preventing rickets and managing calcium levels. In other words, it's designed just to keep your bones from softening, that's it. But vitamin D does far more than protect bones. In fact, vitamin D isn't even really a vitamin. A vitamin is something you must get from food because your body cannot make it. Vitamin C, vitamin B12, those are true vitamins. Vitamin D is different. Your body manufactures it from cholesterol when your skin is exposed to UVB light from the sun. That means it functions much more like a hormone than a vitamin, and hormones regulate genes. Vitamin D influences over 1,000 genes in your body. Think about that, 1,000 genetic switches that control immune function, inflammation, brain chemistry, muscle strength, insulin sensitivity, cell growth, and even cancer regulation. But most physicians are trained to view vitamin D through a very narrow lens, calcium and bones. That's the classical endocrine pathway. Here's how it works. You get sun exposure or take vitamin D3. That form is inactive. It travels to your liver where it's converted into 25-hydroxyvitamin D. Then it goes to your kidneys where it's converted again into the active form 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D. That active form then helps regulate calcium levels and bone metabolism. This pathway has a long half-life, about 3 weeks. So technically, you don't need daily vitamin D just to maintain calcium balance. But there's another system almost never discussed. It's called the autocrine or paracrine system. In this system, your cells themselves convert inactive vitamin D into its active form locally without needing the kidney. This happens inside immune cells, brain cells, breast tissue, colon tissue, prostate tissue, muscle tissue, and more. And this system has a half-life of only about 24 hours. That means it requires regular, consistent vitamin D availability. This pathway is responsible for immune regulation, inflammation control, nervous system stability, muscle function, mood regulation, and cellular protection against abnormal growth. So here's the disconnect. Medicine bases vitamin D recommendations on the bone pathway, which needs very little, but your immune system, brain, and protective systems operate on the short half-life pathway, which likely requires much higher daily levels. To meaningfully support this, researchers suggest blood levels of 50-80 nmol for most adults. That often requires 8,000 to 10,000 IU of vitamin D3 per day, sometimes more depending on body weight, skin tone, geographic location, and that shocks people because they've been told 2,000 IU is high. But toxicity typically occurs at sustained blood levels above 150 nmol, usually from taking extremely high doses without monitoring, and often without adequate magnesium vitamin K2. The real epidemic isn't vitamin D toxicity, it's vitamin D deficiency. Low vitamin D levels are strongly associated with increased risk of autoimmune diseases, respiratory infections, depression, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, multiple sclerosis. Now let's think logically. If vitamin D status influences immune balance, inflammation, and cell growth, what would happen if a large portion of the population corrected their deficiency? Even a modest 10-20% reduction in chronic disease would have massive implications. The pharmaceutical industry generates hundreds of billions annually from medications targeting cancer, autoimmune diseases, depression, diabetes, and hypertension. Vitamin D is free from sunlight. It's inexpensive as a supplement. It cannot be patented in its natural form. That doesn't automatically imply conspiracy. But it does explain why there's little financial incentive to aggressively promote optimal levels beyond bone health. Now, let's be clear. Vitamin D is not a miracle cure. It is not a replacement for proper diet, sleep, exercise, and stress management, but it is foundational. You cannot have optimal immune regulation if you are deficient. You cannot regulate inflammation properly without it. You cannot fully activate certain protective genes without it. And here's something else rarely mentioned. Vitamin D works synergistically with magnesium and vitamin K2. Magnesium is required to activate vitamin D. Many people are magnesium deficient. If you take high-dose vitamin D without magnesium, you may feel worse. Vitamin 2 helps direct calcium into bones and away from arteries. Without K2, increasing vitamin D could theoretically contribute to calcium misplacement in susceptible individuals. So context matters. But the fear narrative that vitamin D is inherently dangerous ignores both evolutionary biology and modern deficiency data. The average person today spends 90% of their time indoors. Sunscreen blocks up to 98% of vitamin D production. Darker skin requires more sun exposure to produce the same amount. Aging reduces skin production capacity. Deficiency is common worldwide. Instead of asking how little can I take safely, the better question might be what level does my body actually function best at? The answer should be guided by blood testing, specifically 25-hydroxyvitamin D levels, not blind fear. Optimal health isn't about avoiding every potential risk. It's about understanding balance. Yes, excessive amounts of anything can be harmful, even water. But that doesn't mean we avoid water. Vitamin D is a hormone, like regulator designed by nature to connect sunlight to cellular function. Avoiding it entirely or staying chronically deficient may carry far greater risks than responsibly optimizing it. So maybe the question isn't why vitamin D can be toxic. Maybe the real question is, why were we taught to fear something our biology was built around? And is the bigger danger not excess but absence? All right, let's continue this conversation and take it deeper. Mainstream medicine does not like vitamin D, at least not when you start talking about optimal levels instead of minimum survival levels. You'll rarely see major journals enthusiastically publishing bold claims about vitamin D preventing autoimmune disease, supporting mood, reducing cancer risk, or improving metabolic health. And this isn't speculation. I've personally interviewed physicians and researchers who admitted there is resistance when studies show strong positive outcomes with higher dose vitamin D. Now think about this. A large randomized clinical trial out of Harvard University followed nearly 26,000 participants and found that vitamin D supplementation reduced autoimmune diseases by 22%. 22%, that's not trivial. Autoimmune disease is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Medications for rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, these generate enormous revenue annually. So let's ask a rational question. Is the real issue widespread vitamin D toxicity? Or is the fear narrative disproportionate to the actual risk? Because here's what typically happens. The official recommended intake stays between 600 and 800 IUs per day, amounts designed primarily to prevent rickets and maintain minimal calcium balance. Then when someone suggests 2,000 IUs, eyebrows go up. At 4,000 IUs, some call it high dose. At 8,000 to 10,000 IUs, people start using the word toxic. But pause for a second. 20 minutes of strong summer sun exposure can generate approximately 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 in your skin. 20 minutes that were inherently toxic, humanity would have struggled to survive long before supplements existed. Now here's something even more fascinating. Your body doesn't interpret vitamin D as a supplement. It interprets vitamin D as a signal of season. Vitamin D levels naturally fluctuate throughout the year. In summer, levels rise. In winter, they fall. This rhythm is encoded in your DNA. It's part of your biological programming. When vitamin D drops in winter, your body shifts into a conservation mode. Metabolism slows slightly. Immune patterns change. Hormonal signaling adjusts. Now imagine living indoors most of the year. Office job, artificial lighting, minimal direct sun exposure. Sunscreen anytime you step outside. Even in sunny climates, people avoid midday sun completely. For many individuals, it's metabolically winter 365 days a year. And when your body perceives winter, what does it do? It conserves. It slows metabolism. It becomes more insulin resistant. It shifts mood chemistry. It prepares for scarcity. This is one reason vitamin D deficiency is associated with weight gain, low mood fatigue, and increased susceptibility to infections. Low vitamin D can signal the body to dial things down to conserve energy. Now let's talk about melanoma and sun exposure, because this is where fear becomes deeply ingrained. Public health messaging since the 1980s has strongly emphasized sun avoidance. Sunscreen use increased dramatically. People were told to fear the sun, yet melanoma rates increased significantly after this shift. Correlation does not automatically equal causation, but it raises important questions. Interestingly, some observational data suggest that people who work outdoors may have lower melanoma risk than those who work indoors and experience intermittent, intense sun exposure. Chronic moderate exposure appears biologically different than occasional burning exposure, but instead of asking, what is healthy sun exposure? The dominant narrative became avoid the sun. And when sunlight became something to fear, vitamin D became collateral damage. Now let's address toxicity realistically. True vitamin D toxicity is rare. It generally requires sustained intake of extremely high doses, often hundreds of thousands of IUs daily for many months. The primary complication is hypercalcemia, meaning too much calcium in the blood. That can lead to kidney stones or, in severe cases, kidney stress. But compare that to deficiency. Vitamin D deficiency is common worldwide, and deficiency is associated with immune suppression, higher infection rates, increased risk of certain cancers, mood disorders, cognitive decline, muscle weakness, increased inflammation, metabolic dysfunction. Which is more common, toxicity or deficiency? By far deficiency. Yet the public conversation is heavily weighted toward toxicity. Now here's something critical that's often ignored in research and public messaging cofactors. Vitamin D does not operate in isolation. Magnesium is required to activate vitamin D. Without sufficient magnesium, vitamin D cannot be properly converted into its active forms. Many individuals are magnesium deficient due to soil depletion, processed food consumption, and stress. Then there's vitamin K2. Vitamin D increases calcium absorption. Vitamin K2 helps direct that calcium into bones and teeth and away from arteries and soft tissues. Without K2, calcium regulation can become inefficient. So when someone takes high-dose vitamin D without magnesium and K2 and without monitoring blood levels, they are not using it intelligently. That doesn't mean vitamin D is dangerous. It means physiology is interconnected. But nuance doesn't sell headlines. Fear does. So the narrative becomes simple. Vitamin D can be toxic. The more useful question would be, what blood level supports optimal immune and metabolic function? Most experts looking beyond bone health suggest that a 25-hydroxyvitamin D blood level between 50 and 80 ng/ml may support broader systemic benefits. For many adults, especially those with darker skin, higher body fat, or limited sun exposure, Achieving that range often requires more than 800 IUs daily. It may require 5,000, sometimes 8,000, occasionally more, depending on the individual. This should be personalized and monitored. But let's step back and look at the larger picture. Vitamin D is a hormone-like compound produced from cholesterol in your skin when exposed to sunlight. It regulates gene expression in over 1,000 pathways. It influences immune tolerance. It modulates inflammation. It communicates seasonal signals to your metabolism. And we've reduced that entire biological symphony down to don't take too much. The real danger may not be thoughtful optimization. The real danger may be chronic deficiency disguised as normal. So instead of asking only, is it safe to take higher doses of vitamin D3? We should also be asking, is it safe to live in perpetual deficiency? Because that question changes everything. Vitamin D toxicity is rare and typically preventable with monitoring and proper nutrient balance. Vitamin D deficiency is widespread and silently disruptive. When you understand the full picture, the seasonal biology, the immune modulation, the gene regulation, the cofactors, the fear starts to dissolve. And you begin to see vitamin D not as a risky supplement, but as a foundational signal your body has relied on since the beginning of human evolution. Maybe it's time we stopped fearing the sun and started understanding it.